Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has a language angle and a war angle and a bunch of other things because, let's face it, the movie is 3 hours long. But on The Odyssey's dialogue, he chose to use colloquial English and an American accent for most of his characters. Why did he do it? Is it a problem? Let's ask Romeo and Juliet. So the language of a movie shapes it in at least 3 ways. First, it shapes the characters. The way a character speaks, like its accent, its prosody, the words the character chooses, everything informs the audience who that character is. So, if a character says, "Give me your money right away," you have the perspective of that character. But if that same character said, "Would you please send me your purse presently," you would have a very different perspective of that same character. So language showcases personality, memories, upbringing, and therefore language shapes character. Language also shapes the world around the characters. So think, for example, Enchanted. She comes speaking in a very specific way, like a Disney princess. But the world around her in New York, everybody speaks very fast. They just exchange information. They don't have time for Giselle's shenanigans. They just want to get their point across. And that establishes that the world in which Giselle is now is a bleak world. So that establishes the world that we're going to inhabit in that movie. Another great example of language shaping a world very clearly and literally is Harry Potter. You have the spells, for example. They're a mix of real Latin with dog Latin. So you have Lumus and Expelliarmus. That is part of that world. When you hear a word that kind of sounds like Latin or even like straight up Latin, you think, oh, that could be a Harry Potter spell. Because the world has shaped our perception that whenever these British characters are speaking in something like Latin, that's a spell, that's something magical, that's something that's out of this world. And finally, and very importantly for the Odyssey, language shapes our perception of a movie. I saw this video on social media. Unfortunately, I don't have the source. It was just one of those scrolling things. And the person was talking about how we have the expectation that the characters in the Odyssey are gonna talk like in a British-ish accent, you know? Because it's so epic that they kind of have to talk in a British accent. And it got me thinking about Lord of the Rings. Middle-earth doesn't exist. But it would be very weird if we had a version of the Lord of the Rings that would talk like this.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Kind of don't want Gandalf sounding like that, or at least we don't expect him to. So the point is, we have a preconception built over centuries of media how these characters should sound like in their specific worlds. But Nolan does not follow that rule. By the way, can you remember another example of language shaping a world? Tell me here in the comments. So why doesn't Nolan follow that rule? That's where Romeo and Juliet comes in. Romeo and Juliet was written in the 16th century. It was written by William Shakespeare, whoever that was, and has been adapted like a bajillion times. Sometimes directly, and sometimes just taking the bare bones of the story and building something new upon it. One of the most relevant adaptations is Romeo and Juliet by Baz Luhrmann, a director that I quite like, that went the opposite way of the Odyssey. So if you haven't seen it, Romeo and Juliet by Baz Luhrmann takes place in modern times, but he chose to use the original Shakespearean language. So you have Leo DiCaprio with Hawaiian shirts, guns, and a place called Verona Beach, but the entire text comes straight from the Shakespearean original. So that creates a very stark contrast in which modern day characters are talking like they're out of 1596 instead of 1996. So why did Baz Luhrmann do that? That choice is very important for us to understand Nolan's choice in the Odyssey. By bringing that text from late 16th century into modern times without changing the dialogue and still making it work, Baz Luhrmann shows that the text is atemporal, that the story is atemporal. The conflict between how they feel in that moment and what they know is the right thing to do works every time. By the way, let me know if you think Romeo and Juliet is the best adaptation of the story, because yes it is. So the first connection between Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet and Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is John Leguizamo. The second connection between Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet and Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is the way that he uses language to ground the characters in their world. Baz Luhrmann uses language to make Romeo and Juliet atemporal. Christopher Nolan uses language in a different way. The Odyssey is an epic, and as we've mentioned, we expect British-ish people, even though they're Greek, talking a British-ish accent in a very grandiloquent way, you know, like puffed up chests, and talking like they knew they are the most important people in one of the most important stories of all time. Nolan subverts that. Yes, it is a world of sentient whirlpools, of cyclops and other darker, supernatural elements. As the movie says in the opening, it's a time of apparent magic. But by having his characters speaking plain English, Nolan brings reality to them. From the cast to the way that the characters speak, all choices here show us that even though it is very magical for us, it is surreal for us, this is their reality. So in the Odyssey, Nolan seems to be saying this is not some high fantasy. Yes, this is fantastic, bizarre, and brutal sometimes, but this is real for them. This is crucial for our talk on the effects of war on people, but that's for next week. For now, what matters is that's what the movie says, and it says that in plain English. What about you? Do you like the regular English approach that Nolan takes in the Odyssey? Or do you think it makes it less epic? We're gonna talk about war and the Odyssey next week. So subscribe so you don't miss out on the conversation because I'd love to have you here. See you next time.